Hello, and welcome to the lecture, Sampling, Reliability, and Validity in Qualitative Research. First, let's talk a little bit about sampling. There are general considerations when you're thinking about choosing a sample for your research study. Those are type, so what type of sample, and we're going to go through different sample types. The size of your sample, how many people or units or documents or recordings or word count on a corpus are you trying to get for your sample size. The representativeness of your sample, your access to your sample, and your strategy for sampling. Let's start with looking at different types of non-probability samples. In qualitative research, we generally are not looking to be representative in the same mathematical way that quantitative research tries to be representative. So I'm going to talk to you about these 6 different types of sampling methods: convenience, purposive, quota, dimensional, snowball, and volunteer. And I'm just going to jump out of PowerPoint to show you these in a little Word document that's a little bit more texty than I like for PowerPoint. All right, so here are the non-probability samples. A convenience sample is a sample of known individuals. So this could be students in a class you teach, members of your family, some kind of captive audience that you have easy access to. There are plenty of studies that use this as their sampling method, and it's perfectly fine as long as you explain why you've chosen this method. A purposive sample, on the other hand, is where you select subjects who you consider are key informants about your topic. So, for example, I have some examples related to education here, but if you wanted to talk to literature professors because you were interested in certain aspects of second language acquisition in literature classes, low achieving or high achieving students, bilingual school students or public school students, or if you're looking at documents as your unit of investigation, ESL syllabi. These are just examples, but basically purposive means that you are selecting participants in your study who you consider to be key informants. Now, a quota sample is where you select your sample in proportional relationship to the population. So if we're looking at groups of language proficiency, so we have basic, intermediate, advanced. If you have 30 basics, 30% of your population that you're trying to describe is basic and 40% intermediate and 30% advanced, then a quota sample would look like 3 basic, 4 intermediate, 3 advanced, because it is proportional in relationship to the number of people in your sample. Similarly, if you're looking at some kind of population, and in that population it happens to be 70% female and 30% male, then a quota sample of 10 would be 7 women and 3 men. In a dimensional sample, you refine your quotas. So within your breakdown, within your 30% of basic level English speakers, you know that half of them went to public schools and the other went to private, then it also breaks that down. It's just like another level of refining of your quotas. A snowball sample is where your initial context of purposeful informants refer you to other informants, like a snowball. So you might start out with 3 people that you know speak a certain language variety, and then you ask them for referrals to include other people who speak that language variety in your sample, and you do that for all participants until you get to your number of participants that you are wanting for your work. Volunteer samples are where friends, family, or just people in the general public answer some kind of advertisement. So you may have seen a poster or a post on Facebook that says, hey, I'm looking for people to participate in my study. So those would be volunteers. And by the same token, if you are looking for documents, like if you're doing a discourse analysis on some kind of document or something like that, then they would be documents willingly submitted. And finally, a theoretical sample is when you're looking to propose a theory or an examined explanation about a topic, you search for subjects or sources who can help you develop this theoretical framework. So this is grounded theory as qualitative research with a larger purpose of theory development. So those are 6 types of sampling that we might use in qualitative research. And all of them are perfectly fine. They just need to be justified based on your research that you're trying to do, your research questions, and very clearly explained in your proposal or in the methodology section of a paper that you write. Let's talk about validity. What is validity in positivist research? And then what is validity in naturalistic research? Validity in positivist research pursues controllability, replicability, predictability, universal laws about behavior. Validity a highly valid positivist research study would be context-free. It looks at fragmentation of research, randomized samples, and observability. So validity looks very different for positivist research than it does for qualitative and more naturalistic types of research. For example, validity, you get higher validity in a study if you have a control group and an experimental group in this type of research. You want your research to be replicable, and replicable means that you get the same results by doing the same thing. So this is very different from qualitative research and the naturalistic or descriptive tradition, because we kind of understand that our research can't necessarily be replicable because we are dealing with humans, and even if we ask them the same question at the same time of day, they might give us a different answer. Similarly, with predictability. And then I just think the core message here is that positivist research is searching for universal laws about behavior, which is different than the purpose of qualitative research. So validity in the naturalistic tradition pursues natural setting and thick description of contexts and processes, so holism. So we're really looking to describe something that's happening, not looking for a control group and an experimental group, but rather to really deeply explain a phenomenon. Data is socially and culturally situated, and that's part of what we talk about in qualitative research. Validity in naturalistic research pursues understanding of the meaning and intention of the participants. So we're looking for members' meanings. Your study will be more valid if you are seeing and reporting the situation from the, quote, native's point of view or the insider's point of view. Validity also increases by inductive data analysis. So instead of using a priori or already set up categories, you are getting your categories from the data. Validity in naturalistic research also values researcher involvement and reflexivity. So you are going to actually talk about who you are as a researcher and your positionality in relation to the people that you are researching or the phenomenon that you're researching. Validity also pursues in this type of research recognition of the interpretive nature of accounts. So we're not looking for hard facts, but rather a certain person's interpretation of something that happened. And also, your research study will be more valid if you use respondent validation. So once you begin to form conclusions, if you go back to your respondents or your informants, they might be called, and ask them if you're on the right track and get their opinion about how your results are, whether they seem acceptable to the respondents or whether you're off track. So here are some measures of validity. Internal validity means a coherent design and credible data. External validity, you can get generalizable or applicable results. Now, in qualitative research, we're not trying to be generalizable, but applicable, definitely. Content validity, that means that the instruments cover what they claim to cover. So if you create, for example, a survey about language use, that your questions are actually getting at what they purport to get at. Construct validity, so there's reliable operationalization. So for example, competence and understanding. There's ecological/cultural validity, which means that your research is appropriate and respectful to the natural setting. And catalytic or consequential validity, that research leads to action or improves practice or performance. I'm going to talk a little bit about triangulation. Now, what is triangulation? When we're doing qualitative research, we are researching some phenomenon. So let's take, for example, differences in pronunciation of a certain term in a certain variety of a language. What we want is different views on that phenomenon. So maybe you'll have people do a survey that will give you one view onto the phenomenon, the results of the survey. A different view you might get a different view on that phenomenon from a small group interview or a focus group, and another view from analyzing documents, for example. So the idea is that these phenomenons kind of exist in the world, and whatever you're trying to study, you want to get different perspectives on it and not just one. So how does triangulation increase the validity of a research project? The more different pictures of the phenomenon or descriptions of the phenomenon you have through different methods, the more valid your study will be, because you're getting a more complete and real picture. So what measures can you take to increase the validity of your proposed studies? Instead of doing a study with just one instrument, you have various instruments, maybe 2, maybe 3, that help you understand the nature of a certain phenomenon or something that you're trying to study. So the idea in general of triangulation is that there's this phenomenon and you're looking for different ways to describe it with different types of methods and instruments. Let's talk a little bit about reliability and contrast reliability in positivist research to reliability in naturalistic research. So reliability in quantitative research often concerns consistency or stability, accuracy, predictability, replicability, descriptive and causal potential. While reliability in qualitative research often concerns accuracy, fairness, comprehensiveness, respondent validation, empathy, uniqueness, explanatory and descriptive potential, and confirmability. Basically, we're looking at different sets of things to consider a quantitative study reliable than we are to consider a qualitative study reliable. So you want to consider the reliabilities, the following when you're thinking about reliability of your study that you'll design. How can you ensure that your informants don't just answer what you want to hear? So if you're doing, if you're asking somebody something, how do you know that they're telling you the truth? How do you ensure that your respondents understand what you're asking them in surveys and interviews? And how can you ensure that your own biases and preconceptions do not taint the data? So I'll give you some hints for each of these, or things to consider in your study design. In terms of ensuring that your informants just don't tell you what they want, what you want to hear, you need to form your questions and create surveys if that's what you're doing. So create your instruments in a way that doesn't prompt them to answer a certain thing. If you're in an interview with someone, you can be very clear about what your intention is, because participants or informants can think you have a certain intention. For example, because I am an English speaker and I'm an English professor, sometimes informants might think that I want them to speak in English, when really having them answer in Spanish is perfectly fine for me. Um, so, and also maybe they think that they're supposed to have a particular attitude towards English because they're talking to an American about it. So that's something that you can try at least to build into your protocol to say, hey, whatever you answer is fine. I don't think X or Y. I just really want to know what you think. Doesn't completely solve the problem, but can help mitigate it. How can you ensure that your respondents understand what you're asking them in surveys and interviews? I definitely recommend piloting surveys, both surveys and interviews. Do a pilot interview and see if your questions are confusing to somebody. Do a pilot survey before you put out a survey on a larger scale. And how can you ensure that your own biases and preconceptions do not taint the data? I would say that in qualitative research, we understand that your own biases and preconceptions can absolutely taint the data, and the way that you mitigate that is through informant checks, so that your informant or participants, you want them involved in your data analysis process, so that they check and see whether you are on the right track. And then also, you should reveal your biases and preconceptions in the write-up of your study. It's important that you articulate your positionality. And that's the end of this presentation.